Hello, fictional. Welcome to the Fiction Series X. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei got harem with Rias and Akeno? Part 17. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Issei, please calm down. Rias pleaded both verbally and mentally as she and Akeno braved close proximity to their mate. The demi-drake was angry and understandably so, and it translated to him unintentionally releasing his usual killing intent, blistering heat, and a scowl that wouldn't be out of place on an actual teenage delinquent. Rias Issei managed to grind out between clenched teeth. Would you kindly explain what the hell this is? This was a doorway that had been revealed to the group in a magically appearing hallway of the old school building. Wrapped in yellow caution tape, with several mundane locks and chains, as well as an enchantment strong enough that even Issei could detect it, it was clear that nothing was going in or out of that door. Hence Issei's righteous anger. It's not what you think, Issei. Rias managed to get close enough to her mate to throw her arms around him, the heat and energy he was releasing abating enough for the others to move forward from around the corner they had retreated to. This is where Gasper has been staying for the past 2 years. Akeno put a hand on Issei's shoulder, though it didn't stop the dragon from glaring at the formidable barrier before him. And though it seems to parallel what you went through, we did not put him there without undue reason. Issei, Gasper Vladi used up my only mutated piece at the time, a bishop, Rias supplied wearily. I did it to save him after he had been killed by vampire hunters, but that was when I found he was half-human daylighter with an extremely rare sacred gear, forbidden Baylor view. So you caged him because he could be a weapon. Issei wasn't angry at his mates, but at the situation he was seeing and judging based on past experience. Like I was. No. Rias put herself between Issei and the door, so he had no choice but to look at her. Gasper didn't have control over his sacred gear. The gaze of the god Baylor freezes the time of anything and everyone the gear's wielder sees. The only way to resist it is to be stronger than the slumbering Baylor, something which Rias hung her head in shame. I am not. Baylor wasn't even close to the level of the original top 10, but compared to those alive and free today, he'd at least make the top 20. That's the kind of power we're dealing with. When someone's time is brought to a standstill, time around them still flows naturally. Akeno tried to explain it as best she could. Gasper was persecuted by his own family because one can't possibly know what is happening around them when entrapped by it. Theft, kidnapping, murder, rape, torture and mutilation. In fact, in terms of potential it's borderline Longinus class. And so your servant is being imprisoned because he has potential. Issei couldn't help but unleash some of his presence, and unlike before, Rias and Akeno were not aroused by it, but terrified like the others. Still, they didn't recoil from it. The higher-ups in the devil government demanded it. Jack the Ripper was terrible enough, and he was only human. With his horrible precedent and to have another with his gear resurrected as a devil with little to no self-control brought consequences we legally had no choice but to accept. Akeno explained, which lowered Issei's tension somewhat. And then I went and gave him a mutated bishop, amplifying that power and ensuring that I could never help him learn control when he froze me by accident. Rias cursed herself. A king has to have control of her peerage, or else she isn't fit to be a king. It got to the point that Serziches had to step in and personally contain Gasper before he could cause permanent harm unintentionally. That still doesn't excuse. Think of it like this, Kiba volunteered. On a harmless level, it activates while he's in class. The teacher is frozen, there's nothing stopping the students from leaving early. Kick it up a notch, say if we had him in our rating game against Razor. Our own team is trapped in place, easy checkmate and or loss. But even then, that's just a game with a safety net, no one would be permanently injured. Have him go out to get groceries, wait patiently at a busy intersection for the crosswalk, then a car or several instantly goes from 60 km/h to dead stop. Issei couldn't help but pale at the implications of it. If just the car was frozen, not the occupants, and at that great a deceleration, the forces involved would be fatal, to say nothing of the surrounding vehicles that would continue to move at normal speed, factoring in road conditions, pedestrians, rush hour. Even accounting for the mentality of the current wielder, forbidden Baylor view unchecked was a walking catastrophe waiting to happen. No way around it, time manipulation was dangerous if not properly executed. And that was just in the mundane world. Issei could easily think of several mystical scenarios and historic events that could be severely changed for the worse if power like that was let loose haphazardly. Isolation was the most effective way to handle it. I don't like it, he growled. I know, and you don't have to, Rias whispered as she stepped on tiptoes to kiss her mate chastely. Because now, I have you, and you can help him where I failed. Rias turned around to face the door and held up the flyer that Serziches had given her. With the magical signature of the Mau present, the enchantment on the double doors materialized as a complex triple-layered circle that spun like cams inside a combination lock until they aligned together. They all turned 90 degrees in a counterclockwise direction, then faded. The security tape and mundane locks vanished as well, apparently only there for cosmetic purpose to ward off the mundane human or curious student. Why it was necessary when the entire corridor had been previously concealed by Surzich's magic Issei couldn't fathom. Rias pushed the double doors open, the hinges squeaking from disuse. The room was dark, no windows, no lights to illuminate the place. Being devils, it wasn't as big an issue, everyone present had higher than normal low-light vision, while Issei could see as clear as day. But that he couldn't. If there was a word to describe the place, it was pink. Great red, office, Tiamat, and by my own name, why did it have to be pink? Issei couldn't help but agree, particularly after the magical girl incident Serafol brought upon them the other day. There was a lot of pink. Wallpaper, rug, finish on the furniture, bed sheets and comforter, pillowcase, drapes, the glossy finish on a flat-screen TV, likewise with a computer setup, stuffed animals. Wasn't this supposed to be a boy's room? Asper, please come out, Rias crooned softly. You don't need to stay here anymore. No, I don't wanna. A coffin that had escaped Issei's notice previously rattled. Issei tried to ignore that it too was painted in the horrid middle ground between white and red. I can't go outside. Without warning, the coffin burst open, at which several things happened all at once. A near platinum blonde elfish figure popped out from the wooden container. At the same time, Issei's skin tingled. He frowned, shaking his limbs, and more felt rather than heard the sensation of a glass outline around him shattering as he did so. He could only assume that it was the effect of forbidden Baylor view. As expected, he was caught in the affected area, but it wasn't working on him. It did, however, seem to work on everyone else in the room. Rias, Akeno, Kiba, Zenobia, Ravel, Asia, and Kaneko were all outlined in some purple aura. Not aura with a capital A, but more like the personal energies of each individual had suddenly stopped. While he was still observing, the sound of a box slamming shut alerted him to the daylighter's current whereabouts. A sturdy cardboard box in the opposite corner, glowing pink eyes looking out from the cutouts for handholds. Okay, come here you. Issei unceremoniously moved to the box, opened it, much to the shrill surprise and simultaneous dismay of its contents, and picked this Gasper up by the collar for a better look. He wasn't wrong when he said the boy had elvish features. Pointed ears, slender frame and face, and pink-faceted eyes with his sacred gear active. That wasn't what surprised him. I was under the impression that this Vladi was a male. Wah. You're too scary, go away. Again, Issei felt the tingle as the Baylor view swept over him, and once again, his motions dispelled the failed effect, surprising the half-vampire. Pipe down, would you? Issei winced as the shrill cries of the boy irritated his own hearing. At this, the bishop quieted down and seemed to actually notice that yes, the others were still frozen, and no, his captor was not. Since he had stopped struggling, it was all too apparent that the boy was indeed wearing a Kuo girl's uniform. And wearing it quite convincingly. You're not frozen like the others. Obviously. Issei retorted, his ears still ringing slightly. As an afterthought, he manifested his own sacred gear and watched as Gasper's eyes widened in recognition of the glowing wings. Divide. Looking over his shoulder, Issei saw that the others were still immobilized. Rather than activate his balance breaker, he opted to simply wait out the 10-second limit before repeating the process. Divide. Still nothing, and the boy should be down to a quarter of his original strength. Divide. Down to an eighth now, and though Issei could barely tell that there was any increase in his own available energy, it was enough to apparently break the time-stop effect. The purple veil enveloping the others shattered into sparkling fragments, and the others blinked to find Issei in a different place than before, with an apparently terrified schoolgirl hanging by the back of her collar. Issei. Rias was turning red again. Put him down right now. Aha. He is a boy. So not helping. Issei wanted nothing more right now to equip his balance breaker and hide behind an impassive faceplate. That was how irritating he and Albion both found the situation. Asper Vladi, host of the borderline Longinus level forbidden Baylor view, was a crossdressing shut-in. He supposed it was only natural for high-tier sacred gear wielders to have some quirks. He was dual-bonded, the Red Dragon Emperor he had fought was a combat maniac, and Tobio seemed to be pleased to maintain his existence as a happy-go-lucky traveling wannabe comedian. He had no quarrel or predisposition against crossdressing. He personally didn't see the interest until Akeno and Rias had started wearing his shirts and nothing else. Asper took it to a new level by seeming to forget he was male altogether. With his power reserves divided, Gasper wasn't much of a threat to anyone, but that didn't stop him from diving back into his cardboard box, if not for fear of freezing anyone, but for his fear of everyone. Apparently, his own power scared him more than it scared everyone else present. Thus, the intense phobia of anything and everyone outside his little room, which was less of a prison cell as Issei had first thought and more of a safe space for the first year. Out with you, Issei kicked the cardboard box lightly. You've gotta come out sometime, pal, make it easy on yourself. No. Issei stepped aside as Rias gave him a harsh look as she herself moved forward. Having simply taken Gasper's box with them, they had returned to the clubhouse's main room. The others hadn't sat down, surrounding the box in a disjointed circle. This is the wielder of a would-be Longinus. Ravel tilted her head, the coils of hair on either side of her head swaying. And our fellow bishop. Asia seemed excited to interact with their newfound companion. If only he'd come out of the box. Indeed, Rias knelt next to the box, hand darkly aglow with destruction. As the cardboard deteriorated, Gasper tried to flee only for Rias to catch and hug him close. Calm down, Gasper. There's no need to be afraid. The boy squirmed in place, but Rias had had practice holding a much stronger Issei. Even if the demidrake had allowed himself to be pulled around, the practice still applied, and without his sacred gear, Gasper couldn't flee. What I don't understand is why he's still frightened, Zenobia commented. His power isn't a threat anymore. What I want to understand is why he's dressed as a human female. I don't want to go outside, Gasper was still squirming, sniveling in Ria's embrace. Please don't make me, I don't want to be hurt or hurt anyone. Ah, so that was it. Awareness of his own power and how he was treated for it, to the point that he'd prefer isolation above all else to avoid confrontation. I don't blame him for wanting to hide, Issei grimaced, but indefinitely is another story. With a mental nudge from Rias, he sat down on the floor so as to diminish his height. He was head and shoulders above most everyone, but over Gasper and Kaneko, he may as well be a giant. Gasper, this is Issei. He'll be helping you train to use your power. Huh? What? Well, this was unexpected. Rias, Issei protested. I'm already helping Kaneko and Ravel in their own studies, not to mention my own training has been put on hold for far too long. Like pre-escape from Tartarus, long. I don't have anything against helping him, but unless I get a signed excuse from you or Sona to waive everything, I've got a lot on my plate once I add up all the schoolwork I've missed. I know, and I'm sorry to put this on top of your current responsibilities, but please. For me. Rias clasped her hands and gave him a pleading look. Albion was certainly unhelpful as Issei heard a mental crack of a whip. He winced at both the inaudible sound and his unspoken concession. Fianni. I'll do it. Rias beamed at him. I'll be sure to make it worth your while. And you won't be alone. Hum again. The doors to the room opened and in walked Sona and Saji. The still familiar Les pawns glared at each other immediately. Sona rolled her eyes at the male display of aggression. As agreed, Rias. Saji gets more practice to use his gear while at the same time helping with your bishop. And then we call that Vegas favor I owe you fulfilled. No, I'm not doing this with him. Saji declared, pointing at Issei as if he were the devil. I hate to agree with anything the idiot says, but training him, even if indirectly, wasn't part of the deal. Issei glared at his red-haired mate, who had the grace to look a little guilty. Issei, your divides bring Gasper's power to an inhibiting level, but its drain is too much for Gasper to effectively train with. Saji's absorption line is an easier way to delicately control how much power he can use. Divide Gaper twice and let Saji do the rest until Gasper's at a condition where he can safely begin to practice. Delicate? I can do delicate. You equip blinding armor and incinerate things, you damn handsome. Delicate isn't in your skillset. Before Issei could move, Akeno snuck up behind him and hugged him from behind. Kaneko too grabbed his side, with Asia restraining on the other. Thus encumbered, Issei's options were highly limited. And while Saji looked immensely pleased with himself, a string of drawn metal brought his attention to the suddenly formed cage of swords Kiba placed him in, further separating the two. In fact, Saji had his eyes crossed at Durandal hovering an inch from his nose, courtesy of Zenobia. Saji, this is necessary. Practicing against a dark god will help in strengthening you, hopefully to attaining balance breaker on your own. Until you're strong enough, Gasper's gaze would freeze you in place, so like it or not, you need Haidu. Sona adjusted her glasses before looking at Issei. And I trust you'll be the mature one in this matter. Ouch, Akeno whispered into his ear. Just what would you say to that, I wonder? Issei wisely kept his mouth shut rather than dig himself a deeper hole. I'll leave you to it then. Sona turned to leave but stopped shy of the doorframe. Saji, if I get a report that you use Dress Breaker, a new spell with similar intent, there'll be hell to pay. And with that she was gone. Rias waved a hand and a transport portal opened. Unfortunately, I have business elsewhere. My brother's being hounded for a second report on Kakabiel's attack, so mine and Akeno's testimonies are needed. Additionally, the Elder Council wants a better understanding of the new holy demonic sword, so you're coming too, Kiba. Rias, the temperature was rising again as Issei growled out his displeasure at being abandoned. It won't be for long, and you only need to bring Gasper to a level where he can function on his own. Rias kissed his cheek. And I'll hurry back. Like I said, I'll make it worth your while. He got a kiss from Akeno, and then the two girls pulled a despairing Kibo off to the gallows that were public speaking. Issei then turned back to the others and mentally groaned at what he had to work with. A Phoenix and Nekashu, who at some point had begun bickering again over some mundane slight. A pacifistic former sister, who already had exceptional control of her benign sacred gear and therefore couldn't offer advice on an offensive one. A former exorcist, whose experience with magic was limited to upkeep and storage of her own equipment. And then the wannabe host of a Dragon King. He had to train Gasper, and they were the ones left to help. Nothing against them, but he had his work cut out for him. Surprisingly, even if none of the remainder of the orc could directly help in matters of Gasper's gear, they made up for it with enthusiasm. Keep running, or you'll feel Durandal's sting. Wahhhh. It was as simple as it sounded. Zenobia had taken it upon herself to train Gasper with something she dubbed Griselda style. So she had taken out Durandal from her personal storage dimension and began chasing the daylighter around the building. It wasn't any better than what Kaneko and Ravel had been doing before that. Both girls had ceased their squabbling in lieu of helping their fellow first year. Issei had been surprised to hear that Rias had made sure there was a reserved place in Kaneko's class for the possibility Gasper learned control. So inspired to help the vampire, both girls had offered him a snack. Garlic, which was lethal to pure vampires. Raw in Kaneko's tiny palm, grilled after Ravel held it in her own. With both varieties, the two had chased him in opposite directions around the building. One would chase Gasper for a lap or two, only for the boy to pull a 180-degree turn to run in the opposite direction as the other took over. The only break Gasper had gotten from that was when Ravel got tired of speed walking in the same direction over and over, and the girls switched up their set patterns. Issei sighed in annoyance. Finally growing bored, as Gasper and Zenobia ran by, he deftly plucked both Daylighter and Durandal from the procession, thus ending it. As entertaining as this is, we should really get serious. Issei's tone left no room for debate, and Zenobia meekly returned her blade back to storage once offered to her. That said, buck up Gasper. There's worse ways to train than by being exercised. Still holding the trembling half-vampire above the ground, Issei casually strolled to the gym, specifically the locker rooms attached to it. Setting the boy down, he pushed him to the changing area. Get into workout clothes. Try to hide and I come after you, he sighed. Saji, set up the volleyball net inside. 5 minutes later, a blushing Gasper stood on one side of the court, dressed in the girl's PE uniform. He whimpered, would you send me to the men's room? On the other side of the net, Issei shrugged. Would you have been more comfortable in the women's? Gasper seemed to consider this for a minute before nodding his head. Yes. Well, I don't know how well the women would take it, so you're stuck with the men's. Issei, what are you doing? Asia asked. She had a reason to be worried. Everyone except for the second-year boys had changed into workout clothes just in case. Saji had simply rolled up his sleeves, and Issei had abandoned his uniform shirt, leaving him in his casual wear. And he was standing next to a large crate of foam balls last seen in the dodgeball tournament. We, and by we I mean really mean me, Kaneko, and Zenobia, are throwing these around Gasper, aforementioned boy shrieked in fear, with the intention to miss. Gasper will be working on stopping each of the balls before they fly past him. Asia, please count how many he freezes. And before we get started. Saji extended absorption line from where he stood on the sidelines, attaching itself to Gasper's forehead. A light purple hue colored the white line, traveling back to the gauntlet as Gasper's already divided energy was further diminished. That's enough, Saji. At Issei's request, Saji detached the line and retracted it. Ready, Gasper? No. Issei shrugged. That's too bad. I really can't think of anything else that might help in such a short period of time. Ready. He and the two girls with him hefted a dodgeball. Aim. Reared arms back to throw. Begin. Later that night, Issei groaned as he sat down on the stool to lather and rinse off the day's exertions. His reptilian nature prevented him from sweating, but the repetition of the motions were soothing. He needed to relax, especially after that day. The dodgeball massacre, as Zenobia coined it, produced mixed results. Gasper had absolutely failed to freeze a single one in place, even though none of their trajectories came even close to him. Instead, Issei had to march over and divide him yet again when Kaneko and Zenobia had been frozen mid-throw. Despite everyone's apparent faith that he could train Gasper to some measure of control, he simply had no clue to go about doing it. Control of his own longiness had come after reliving the many attempts of his predecessors and partially from using his own draconic nature to sympathize with Albion's power. That same path wasn't available here. Teaching Kaneko, or at least supervising her now, wasn't difficult because he knew the basic theories behind the art. The same was true for Ravel and her magic, though hers was easier due to them both being innate Flammicasters. But a sacred gear designed to immobilize time. That might be outside his admittedly combat-focused skillset. Wait, could he divide time? Or how others perceive time? Bah, theories wouldn't help here. Lost in self-recrimination, he tensed up when he was hugged from behind. The dragon soon relaxed, however. Like he had said in the baths once before, he knew that heartbeat as if it were his own. I assume you heard about the day's fiasco. I'd hesitate to call it that, Rias replied as she took the soap from him and began to wash his back. You still can do more for him than I can. So in this, I'd call anything that has him outside and trying a decisive step in the right direction. You don't need to placate me like that, Rias. I can't do it, plain and simple. I might be able to shrug off his power easily, but that doesn't make me qualified to teach. Rias stopped, her hands on his shoulders. Perhaps not. But why let that stop you from trying? Before he could argue, she continued, your teaching methods, however bizarre, are tamer than what you went through. You trained with an objective in mind, escape. Maybe all you need is a way to motivate him. And you can't do that. The king pressed herself against his back, cheek upon his shoulders. I'd do anything for Gasper, for all of you really, you know that. But you know I can't be both his older sister and mentor yet also his king and master at the same time. I'm trying, but it's hard for me to be that right now. The Gremory family's notoriety for compassion and kind treatment for their servants. Rias was no exception, being in a romantic relationship with him was merely the most notable for her. True, she had risen to the occasion before the game against Razor, but in terms of her ability to teach, she was hindered by her own compassion and tendency to cater to the needs and desires of her precious family. A different approach would be needed for Gasper, one that they all knew Issei, having no previous contact or relationship with him, could easily provide. It didn't change the fact that she was shamelessly using him. So I'm the bad cop, you're the good. She swatted his upper arm. Don't go there. I kid, Issei grabbed her hand and held it to his shoulder. You really want me to do this? Her free-ride arm wrapped around him as it rested over his heart. Please. Issei craned his neck to finally look at her directly instead of her mirrored reflection. Surprising her with a deep kiss, he rested his forehead against hers. As you wish. Rias smiled blissfully as their noses rubbed together. For her intentions, this was all the better. Issei's back was still lathered up, ready for her to rinse him with the cold bucket, but she decided to forgo that for now. The dragon tensed immediately when Rias began moving herself up and down against him, and he, hush now. I did say I'd make it up to you, didn't I? They never did manage to leave the onsen that night. Not that either of them could bring themselves to care. The next morning was a Friday, and thus a school day. Unlike most days, Issei was up extremely early, substituting himself with Akeno when he laid Rias into bed beside her queen. Since they had managed to finish bathing before they fell asleep in the baths, Issei simply pulled on his dress shirt over his casual clothes before writing a note and sticking it to the fridge. As he did so, he was struck by how normal things had become. He was far from non-complacent, in fact he welcomed it. Still, a night of passion, notes, school attendance and work. But this have been my life if I hadn't been in Tartarus. Issei mused. His last encounter with Kakabiel aside, he was steadily coming to the conclusion that if he had altered anything in his past to jeopardize where he was now, he would have regretted it. He snorted in disgust. Time travel and fixing things. Some things happened, but that didn't mean they were broken. Speaking of time, it was his own intention to meet up with the time manipulator he'd been working with. Using divine dividing, he transported to Kiba's home, a smaller mansion on the opposite side of the school. Asper's room had been transported to the knight's abode in the same way Zenovia's and Kaneko's had transported to his own. Issei would have thought Rias would have moved him to the mansion they now inhabited in the name of Gasper's safety and keeping a closer eye on him, but last night had let him know otherwise. Rias was trying, albeit with slow progress, to let her servants stand on their own, despite her own protectiveness. Keeping Gasper close but not hovering over him as she preferred with the others was just another step in how she grew as a king. Issei had wondered why her male servants Avim got such privilege while her female servants were kept in close proximity. He had shrugged the thoughts off then, more interested in the giant house. Materializing in the foyer, Issei dispelled his armor. Unlike the veritable fortress, this place was more delicate, in other words, well perfect for rowdy teenage devils, it hadn't been built with a dragon in mind. Even if Kiba's quiet nature was enough to bring down the average, it didn't mean it was a good idea to keep his armor on. Especially when he's dealing with an already timid child. As he walked through the halls to the only 2 bedrooms in use, he debated what to do or what to say. He was so engrossed with his thoughts that he only barely stopped when a door opened in front of him to avoid running into it. A bemused Kiba smirked at him. For an apex predator, you seem to have your head in the clouds quite often. Silence, fool, for my dreams soar above those of single men. Issei hid his amusement as Kiba twitched. Kiba walked around him, book bag in hand. You're here for Gasper? Yeah, I'll most likely be teleporting to school. I'll leave you to it then, I'm already behind a bit. Kiba stopped a ways down the hall, still facing away. Can we talk later? Confused but understanding that whatever Kiba wanted to discuss would press them both for time, Issei grunted his assent. The knight responded in kind and waved as he turned a corner, leaving Issei with only one door left. Issei stepped up to the door and knocked twice. Gasper, you there? There was a soft thump, the noise accompanied by the mental image of a body wrapped in blankets rolling off a bed. Issei. Yeah, it's me. Ready for school. I can't. By the sound of footsteps, Issei guessed that the half-vampire was now standing. I can't go outside. It's not safe. Issei sighed and moved just to the side of the doorframe. With his back pressed to the wall, he slid down to sit on the floor. Because you're worried you might hurt someone. It wasn't a question. When Gasper didn't reply, he continued. You can't let fear control you. It's cliché and cheap to repeat it, but in both our cases it's true. Both. You're not the only one with a power they're afraid to lose control of. Not my Long-Highness, I'm confident in my own ability and Albion's supervision to keep that in check. I'm worried about what I am, a dragon with holy fire, bonded to two devils. Issei held up his right hand to eye level, examining it. I don't dislike my power, I'm proud of it. And it's always a priority to keep them safe from my own element. But given recent history, there's been a bit of doubt in my mind, am I the safest person to be around? He shrugged to himself. Probably not. History's filled with stories of power and opponents being drawn to dragons. Not to mention the fact that if I'm not alert 24/7, a single tongue of white danced in his palm, I could hurt everyone I care for. The door creaked open just a smidge. You're scared of hurting people too. Like before, it wasn't a question. Name a single person who lives in Kuo that has my level of durability. It's not a matter of pride, but simple fact. I have to actively hold back my own strength nearly all the time. Issei clenched his hand into a fist, the hand that held his mate so gently yet mercilessly tore enemies apart in the past. But that doesn't mean you give up and stop trying just on the possibility you might fail. By now Gasper was out in the hallway with him. True, he was sitting in his box but the lid wasn't on. The boy seemed intrigued by what his elder had to say. Feeling slightly self-conscious, Issei decided to redirect. Yesterday didn't turn out the way I wanted, and I guess I'm sorry about that. Can we start over again, after class? The vampire boy smiled, needle-like fangs matching his own feral grin. Sure. Well then, you all set. Without waiting for an answer, which considering Gasper's dress and book bag in the box inferring that it probably would have been yes, Issei sealed the boy, box and all, and teleported out to get to class on time. Classes resumed normally, something that Issei was sure everyone supernaturally aware was grateful for. No spontaneous terror attacks, enhanced tennis matches, or visiting Mao. Normalcy at last. Even the most mundane of chores would be welcomed by them. The payoff only sweetened the deal. Cleaning the pool. Zenobia beat her head at Ria's and Sona's joint announcement in the orc room. Indeed, Sona nodded as she addressed the combined peerages. With the end of term approaching and our work for both clubs reduced in accordance, we have ourselves some free time. Normally, we'd be preparing for the peace summit that our siblings set to be held here on Sunday. There was a note of both irritation and relief in her voice, but their personal staff will be handling the rest of the arrangements. Add in a mandatory suspension of our usual contracts, and I decided cleaning the pool would be a productive use of our time. What she means and won't say, Ria smirked, is that she wants some pool time, and roping us into cleaning it would justify limiting it to our private use for a short while. Sona's cheeks tinged pink, but she didn't deny it. Not that any of Ria's team were complaining about the open invitation. But. No, Asia asked tentatively, raising a hand as if she were still in class. Will Saji be there? All eyes, and the box from which pink eyes glowed, turned to face the pawn in question. The boy was already lost to them, looking slightly with a faraway expression. Sona sighed with exasperation. I'll be sure to handle him, she reassured the bishop, and there was a round of sighs of relief at her declaration. However. She looked meaningfully at Rias and Akeno. That doesn't give you carte blanche to do as you please. I've seen your wardrobe before Rias, and though I'll tolerate a number of your choices in swimwear, you and Akeno will be dressed within appropriate measures. Rias huffed and rolled her eyes, but it was clear she took the message to heart. Akeno was sitting next to Issei and pressed into his side at the order. Issei wasn't sure, but he could have sworn Akeno muttering a curse, the magical kind, under her breath. Since the school day had ended early due to some faculty business or another, the devils moved to the pool immediately and without being delayed by fans of the third-year girls. Something that had admittedly become more frequent was the spontaneous rush of fans among the student body for the older girls. Not that the males and most the females weren't fans of Asia, Kaneko, Ravel or their counterparts in the Citri group, but with summer break approaching, more and more of the student body had realized that their beloved beauties of Kuo were only a little more than one semester away from graduating. Granted, Rias and Akeno had somehow manipulated public perspective and opinion that they were in an amicable open relationship with Issei. The teen in question had no clue how it happened, but if it put aside rumors of jealousy and the forbidden rendezvous between him and Kiba, he'd live with it. Of course, Sona and Tsubaki were still single and therefore worthy targets of all eligible hormone-crazed teenage males, but they resolutely maintained a detached persona from interpersonal relationships. So in the end, people still sought after the girls already spoken for. Thankfully, with an empty campus they arrived unmolested. And woe upon them, their work was cut out already. This, Issei dipped one finger in the water just to examine the algae growth that clung to it, is nasty. And we're to clean this with normal cleaning supplies. Ravel agreed, keeping a healthy distance from the edge. Can't Issei kill it with fire? That'd work. Voices, choruses and heads turned to Issei who shrugged noncommittally. The teen ignited his hand briefly, finding that the green had turned to naught but ash. We're cleaning this with mundane techniques, Sona scolded them, eyes disappearing behind the glint of flashing lenses. And that's that. The groan of disappointment echoed, but the group moved to the locker rooms attached to the pool building. Girls on the far side, boys on the opposite of the room that housed the pumps and heaters. Hiba and Issei both silently agreed to give the others their own space. Saji was still having a moment and Gasper was doing whatever it was he did when he was in his box of solitude. Both males changed quickly, preferring to get the cleaning process underway. Hey Issei. About that talk. Sure, why not? Issei rolled his eyes as he pulled on his swimsuit. In an effort to add more color into his wardrobe, the shopping trip for Zenobia had seen Akeno and Rias add garments beyond his monochromatic palette. The shorts he wore were navy blue, cutting off just above the knee. And in a design that he knew his mates were behind, white flames were patterned into both legs from the hem up. It's about the Excalibur mess. Issei finished tying up and looked at the knight. You already apologized once, you know you don't need to now. Maybe so, but I think I do need to. My fanaticism about destroying them only opened the door for your own torture. My own actions to avenge my comrades was a direct contribution to causing much of the exact same to happen to you. Issei shook his head. You know I don't remember what happened. No thanks to the hitchhiker, he tapped his temple to indicate exactly the nature of how that discussion of memory manipulation had turned out. Doesn't change that someone manipulated you into believing Rias and Akeno were gone. Kiba's expression softened. I know Albion's the only one with specifics, and I know that I can't understand exactly how the bond feels, but I hope I can sympathize enough. Regardless, I do owe you, brother. So anywhere, anytime you need me, I'll be there. Issei was stunned. Flat out blank expression and all. This wasn't what he had expected, and how does one even respond to a declaration like that? By laughing it off, of course. Kiba, I appreciate it bro, but come any closer to me while wearing that and we will come to blows. Kiba glanced downward, dressed in a high-end racing brief, the knight was showing a great deal more of his own skin than other humanoid males were necessarily comfortable with. You jerk. I'm here spilling my guts and you joke about it. The resulting scuffle ended when Kiba managed to get Issei in a chokehold. To any outside observer aware that Issei far overpowered Kiba, it was clear that the demidrake had let his best friend gain the upper hand. But a still frame, saved to one's phone, could lead to questionable impressions. Both Grimory males looked up as Saji snapped that picture on his phone. The pawn looked rather pleased with himself, now armed with blackmail that would stimulate even more of the Kiba Haidu rumors schoolgirls were so fond of. Meanwhile. Did you finish the math homework yet, Zenobia? Asia asked politely as they finished undressing. Not yet I'm afraid. It seems that mathematics is a challenge to overcome. But with God's blessing we can. Both girls clasped their hands and bowed their heads, dear Lord AHHH. Careful now, Rias chided as she slipped the gym uniform over her swimsuit. That won't go away anytime soon. Maybe not, Zenobia rubbed her forehead to alleviate the stinging. But it's a habit I'm loath to abandon. Asia nodded vehemently in agreement. You do seem to attract the lively ones, Sona commented to Rias as she slipped into the uniform. Rias smiled, call it a gift. Their banter was interrupted by an explosion that rocked the room. Followed by another, and then by two high-pitched screams. Without even bothering to look at each other in exasperation, the two kings went outside, followed by the other girls in various states of dress. They were all decent, but only half of them had the full gym uniform, some of them had only pulled the bloomers on just yet. They nearly tripped out the door, seeing that Gasper's box, hovering just off the ground with tiny black devil wings attached, was just outside and ramming the girl's door, as if trying to get in. Or perhaps, to get away. The pool was already surrounded by a chain-link fence, but that had been reinforced and expanded into a roofed cage by hundreds of swords. And inside the cage and around and over the pool, Saji was being chased by the two Grimoire males remaining. Kiba and Issei were thankfully changed into their swimsuits, but those alone, so the entire assembly of girls got to see an up-close view of the two most desirable boys in the school, exerting minimal effort to mutilate one that narrowly escaped being considered among the least desirable. The relative proximity of the girls meant that Issei and Kiba couldn't or wouldn't bring out the best in either of their skillsets. Besides, using their more exotic abilities will be overkill. So with bare hands or ordinary blade, Saji was under tremendous stress to avoid bludgeoning, impalement, concussions, dismemberment, or another coma. Issei. Kiba. Stand down. Rias barked her orders to prevent things from escalating any further. Issei had Saji in a hold and was in the middle of suplexing the pawn. A move that was devastating to begin with, if not for the fact that Kiba had seeded the concrete with some of the most serrated and jagged blades he had available. When the boys registered the orders, the swords disappeared and Issei threw his fellow pawn so that Saji splashed into the murky goop and not on the unforgiving poolside. What the hell was that? Rias looked close to tearing her hair out. I leave you two alone for 5 minutes and what's that? Kiba had both his phone and Saji's connected via the universal cable. Grimoire custom devices to the rescue. After a moment, he tossed the other boy's phone to Issei, who crushed it in his fist and then chucked it into the pool after its owner. Difference of artistic opinion. Kiba took the lead. One that neither of us were willing to let others interpret. Issei nodding didn't help matters, but given Saji's reputation, Sona didn't even bat an eye at the treatment of her servant, while Rias was glaring daggers at the two. Kiba winced in sympathy, there was a limit to how much she could do to punish him compared to Issei. Truly, when your master had significant control over your love life, punishment had no boundaries. Sona hadn't been fazed at all, merely using her own power over water to reveal a drenched and algae-covered Saji sitting at the bottom of the pool, now coughing up the green sludge. A second flare of her magic saw to the enhanced evaporation of the pool, leaving only the aquatic plant life. Together, both teams began work on mopping up and scraping away at the walls and floor. They worked diligently, all excited for the pool time for various reasons. In less than half an hour, they were finished. For a pool roughly 25 meters, half the length of the standard Olympic, it was a testament to their desire to have free undisturbed time to relax. Issei, Tsubasa, and Kaneko dragged the deck chairs and recliners back into position, while Akeno and Sona stood on the diving blocks. Both girls waved their hands, and circles of their respective clan's color expelled torrents of water to fill the pool completely. That is awesome. Saji shouted and Issei couldn't help but agree. Magic did have its use after all. It was then that Issei noticed Sona looking at Tsubasa with a strange expression. Once the heiress knew she had her attention, she pointed at Saji, then made a strange gesture that confused everyone but the girl and the drake. Issei grinned, so this was how she wanted to handle her servant. Using the same move Issei had to knock out Yubaluna, Tsubasa put Saji out for the count. That's one way to deal with him, Rias remarked as the rook blindfolded and zip-tied the unconscious Saji before setting him on a lawn chair. But was it truly necessary? This is part of a punishment he shan't soon forget. He's been on a straight and narrow since the familiar forest, working hard to improve himself, but I'm not interested in him relapsing, Sona replied as she sat down. Regardless, I consider this part of that punishment for being useless when the slimes and chimera showed up. Kaneko looked slightly pleased with herself at the memory of knocking him out that time. Your servant, your call. Enough of that, what are we waiting for? Issei and Kiba didn't waste any time. Kiba was swimming laps, while Issei dove into the deep end, stretched out, and closed his eyes. The sounds of everything else blurred away, muted by chlorinated water. A splash from above caused a few eddies in the water, rocking him. He looked up to see Tsubasa motioning to him to surface. He did so, shaking his head as he broke the surface. With the water out of his face, he looked around and his jaw dropped. He had expected Rias and Akeno to be wearing extremely skimpy two-pieces, but with Sona's strict verdict, they were towing that fine line. Rias wore a two-piece that didn't seem too small, consisting of a matching top and bottom. Akeno had a dangerously liberal bikini set that showed even more skin than their king. What at his attention though was their colors. Pine gold chain tied Ria's suit together, white cloth with blue trim. Akeno's was the same, though hers had seemed to be more fine chain than actual fabric. They weren't their usual seduction colors, those were his. Well, his armor colors. Overtly sexual, not at all. Subtly seductive and exclusively for his benefit, absolutely. I'm in love. Ah, to be loved and be loved. Enjoy it, you've earned it. Issei paid his mentor no mind as he continued to stare at his mates with barely concealed want. And he continued to stare until both girls jumped in, splashing him again. That you can't catch me. Akeno sing-songed as she swam off, Ria's right beside her. Challenge accepted. Issei pushed off the wall, then dove back underwater. Wings partially extended, he used them to expertly glide through the water as his legs kicked for propulsion. His arms were left free. From underwater, he caught up and took a moment to appreciate the view. Both girls were swimming with their heads above water, but their motions were doing so very interesting things to their busts. Issei punched himself in the face even though it was dulled by being underwater, now was not the time for such thoughts. Gathering his feet below him, he pushed off the bottom of the pool, as well as swinging his wings down in a tremendous pull. He quite literally blew the girls out of the water, both shrieking with surprise as he caught them in midair. He then landed on the pool deck, gently setting both girls into recliners, but straining to hold on his amusement at their faux disappointment. Well, we should have expected that. Rias shrugged before digging into the bag at her chair's side. Issei smirked and dove back in. Rather than swim on the surface, like a normal person, he instead swam along the base, pulling himself along by using the vents as handholds in a horizontal wall. Sadly, the entertainment of a venture like that died quickly, after going back and forth a few times he was beginning to get bored. He was interrupted when a pool toy, a brightly colored plastic ring, was thrown into the water, tapping the concrete beside him. Snagging it, he ascended to the surface. Upon his arrival, the teen noticed that Kaneko, Ravel, and Asia were sitting by the poolside, Kaneko armed with a few more of the practice toys from the storage room. You know these are rated for kids around 4 years old, right? 4 and up. Kaneko took the ring back before tossing the lot of them back in the crate beside her. Do you qualify? Does it matter? I can swim. Issei realized his blunder when 3 faces fell simultaneously. Okay. Do you want to learn? He asked politely, knowing what the answer would be. Oh, please. Dope. I suppose it's necessary, if they're learning that is. Alright, one at a time, he immediately began to regret saying that, as the trio of younger girls began arguing for the coveted position of going first. That's it, but keep your head down and keep kicking. Stop either one and you're dead in the water. Kaneko gasped for a breath before putting her head back down in the water, kicking furiously albeit ineffectively. Once her body was at least horizontal again, Issei began to walk backwards again, gently towing her by holding her hands. They were practicing in the shallow portion of the pool, and outcropping from the main competition lanes. That meant that Issei ran out of walking space eventually, he abruptly walked into a wall. Kaneko had a moment's surprise until she collided with him from her momentum. Rather than sink again, even though the water was shallow enough for her, she clung to Issei with all 4 limbs. Not bad, not bad. You'll be good at this, we just need to get you some more practice. Issei walked sideways to the stairs. He sat down on a higher stair, though Kaneko made no move to let go. Kaneko. You can let go now. Kaneko hugged him a bit tighter, pushing her face into his chest. Like it here. Warm. Safe. Issei wasn't entirely sure how to respond to that, though he was saved when Asia and Ravel stepped down the stairs, pulling at his shoulders for his attention. As he turned to help Asia into the pool, much to the frustration of a fuming Ravel, Kaneko helped herself out and over to a laid-out towel to lie down. The same process repeated with the blonde bishops, both extremely eager to learn and equally disappointed when it came to an end. He was sure to at least pat them on the head and praise them for their efforts, earning him some relief from the dreaded tears and mo they could throw at him. He himself finally got out of the pool. Sure, swimming was nice, but he felt confined, what with it being simple enough to swim across as easily as he did. Instead, he meandered back to where Rias and Akeno had set up their towels upon their recliners. Tired out already? Akeno coyly asked, throwing him a bundled towel. He caught it easily, chuckling, for now, yes. Lem know when we get an ocean to play at, I'm gonna take a nap. Before you do, could you help me, Ice? I'd appreciate it if you could rub some oil on my back, I'd hate to burn. He paused in the middle of sitting down, perfectly reversing the motion and pivoting to Rias. She'd already laid out a towel and was stretched out, waiting on her stomach with her top undone. Sure thing. You know, I won't think any less of you if you show some excitement, Rias called over her shoulder as he knelt beside her. You could stand to touch your girlfriends more. Very well then, Rias gasped as cold lotion was sprayed onto her back. That gasp turned into a contented moan as Issei began massaging the oil across her back and shoulders. Oh, my. Though she couldn't see it, Issei had that same smirk he usually wore. He quickly rubbed the oil into her skin, her back and shoulders were fine. He wasn't a professional masseuse and that's okay, but he didn't need to be at the same time. Now, he was taking his time, rubbing her down even more with his hand straying dangerously near the sides of her breasts. The effect that it was having on Rias was clear. Her thighs pressed together, her panting and moans. Issei could smell her arousal and would bet a fortune that her nipples were diamond hard again. He briefly entertained the thought of just teleporting out of there with her in his arms before it got out of hand. Sona and the others hadn't noticed yet, the only person close enough to notice Ria's actions was. Arms wrapped around his midsection, a warm mouth bit lightly on his ear, and two bared breasts pressed against his back. The only other person close enough was one of two women seemingly intent on turning his life into an marriage. Ara, is it my turn yet? Akeno half teased, half bit into his ear. I feel as if I'm burning up, so I'll be borrowing him, Rias. The queen jerked back, enough for Issei's hands to leave Rias alone. The Nadeshiko beauty pulled his hand, swiveling him as she lay down on her chair in the same pose her king did, ready for her turn. Except she was completely bare. I don't want a tan, so you'll have to be very thorough. Issei shook his head apologetically, but picked up the bottle of lotion anyway. He froze though when the vial vaporized in his hand. Akeno. He hadn't finished with me yet. My, you were so close to finishing, but if you had he'd never get started on me. Akeno yawned and unsealed a bottle of her own for Issei to use. You can't expect me to pass an opportunity by. No one here isn't in the know about our relationship, so excuse me for taking my time to savor it. Sensing Ria's anger rising, Issei had a quick second to debate. Let it happen or try to intervene. Both had their merits, but he'd be condemned somehow either way. Smelling both ozone and destruction, he ducked out of the way and back into the pool just before an explosion overtook a portion of the deckside. Wah! Ravel woke up from her short nap when the older girls began fighting. Rias, Akeno. Sona was cut off when electrical discharge struck the metal ladder right before her. Stop this right now. He certainly gave you a good time, but you can't keep him to yourself. Akeno flew backwards to land on the other side of the pool, completely unashamed of her nudity. Rias growled with frustration, black flames coalescing into her hands. Cutting me off like that isn't fair either. Akeno raised her hands and wove a shield just in time for Ria's attack. It dispersed some of the force, deflecting the rest. The cost was a section of the poolside, dust, concrete, and water sent everywhere. Though most everyone was unaffected by that explosion, Kiba was unfortunate enough to still be swimming. Swimming underwater as he was, he had somehow missed the opening salvo, but he became aware as the blast sent him up and out. In a show of incredible agility, he managed to pivot his body and land on his feet, using one hand to drag against the ground to bring himself to a halt. Well, that had been the plan. As he slowed, he tripped over something and fell backwards. To his surprise, he didn't land on hard cement, but on something softer. Blinking water out of his eyes, he noticed what he had landed on. At his feet lay the armbag he had tripped over. What intrigued him was that there was a set of long legs intertwined with his own. He became aware of his head resting on a modest chest, and he turned to look into the heterochromatic eyes of one Tsubaki Shinra. Her breath hitched in embarrassment, and he could feel the effect with great detail. Yudo. Within moments, his face turned as red as hers, and he leapt off her, bowing at a perfect 90-degree angle. My apologies. One blur with night speed and he was gone. The queen's face was understandably pink, she brought a hand to her heart. Oh. The demi-drake indirectly at fault for the scuffle clambered out at the far side of the pool, closest to the building. He made it all of 2 steps before being engulfed in another explosion and debris. Geez, Issei growled as he rinsed off in the poolside shower. He would have jumped back into the pool, but the dust covering him would have further undone the work they put in to clean it. I'd expect this from myself but not them. Slapping the button for more water when the spray shut off, he looked back to the commotion. The outside rinse station was around the side of the building from the pool, but he could see dust and debris still flying from the main area. The place was being steadily charged with static and he could practically taste Ria's magical scent. Issei? A voice whispered from behind him. He turned to see the door to the storage room cracked open. Zenobia. The door creaked open a little more as Zenobia poked her head out and motioned for him to come inside. Confused, he did so, walking forward, only for the female knight to grab his wrist and pull him in, slamming the door shut behind him. Okay, what's this about? Issei blinked as he turned back around to look at the girl. And why did it take you so long just to get dressed? What went unsaid was his confusion as to how she barely qualified as dressed. Yes, he'd seen her in the buff. Twice now that he thought of it. Still, even if she was wearing a swimsuit he couldn't help but look for a moment before turning away. It was a rather stylish one, leaving absolutely nothing to his imagination. None of which explained to him how it could take so long to get so lightly dressed. I've actually never worn a swimsuit before. Being in the church, I had no time for recreational activities. All my waking hours were spent training or reading the scriptures. Well, I'm glad you at least have the chance to do other stuff now. Issei awkwardly tried to steer the conversation away from her former life. Any set plans on what to do now that you're in Ria's group? I've been doing some thinking, now that I've left the church. Before, all I ever did was act in the name of God. She winced as the name used gave her a temporary headache. I was a warrior first, a woman second. But now that I'm a devil and we are no longer enemies, I want to give being a woman a try. Okay. Issei acknowledged her desire with a nod, still careful not to look at her directly. Something was off, enough for his dense mind to take notice. Not really sure what that has to do with anything. My decision for a partner was practically made once I evaluated you. You're the strongest available male close to my age, as well as the one most likely to at least care for his offspring. Huh? Zenobia frowned, putting her hands on her hips and glared at him. I'm asking for you to impregnate me so that I may have a strong child. He blinked. He blinked again. This time he looked at her in shock, only to find that she had undone her top, letting it fall as she stood before him in only the bikini thong. In order for that to happen, she spoke as if to a small child who couldn't understand, and to be fair to her, Issei wasn't being terribly eloquent. We would need to have intercourse several times until I'm with child. I'm aware of the physical limitations of devil reproduction, as well as the energy requirements for dragons, so the more times you finish inside me the better. Whoa, time out. He brought his arms together in a classic X. I'm not doing this. And why not? Zenobia was casually stepping out from her bikini, completely nude now. I was under the impression that males were inclined to procreate. That's not it. Oh. Then is it because I am not attractive as a woman? She seemed somewhat disappointed by that prospect. Caught between telling the truth or avoiding parenthood, Issei found he couldn't lie. That's not it, Zenobia. You're attractive, no mistake. But I can't. I'm already spoken for. I know about what it means to be bonded. I was Irina's partner, remember? And I also know that many bonded males often accepted mating contracts when the population dipped too low. I'm not interested in a contract. Issei blurted out hastily. Even if you accept motherhood and total responsibility, doesn't mean I can accept making a kid for a reason like that. It's not right. Zenobia frowned. I see. Look, I don't really understand how you came to this conclusion, or why you chase after that goal like this, but come on. Issei ducked as Durandal sang through the space his head had occupied. What the hell? If I am to bear a strong child, I need you, Issei. Even if I must seduce you. Yeah, I get that. Issei clapped his hands against the great sword's length on the next swing, locking it in place. And what does a sword have to do with seduction? Zenobia beeped her head in confusion. Seduction is harder than I thought. She pulled her blade back, shocking Issei. He wasn't aware she had that strength. Then I shall fight unarmed. Issei had 2 moments to process what she said. The first moment was wasted on the image of a still naked Zenobia charging him in a classic boxing stance. The next moment he could only focus on the shock of his breath stolen from him as she punched him in the gut. And though by rights he shouldn't even feel it, it hurt. Fuck. He instinctively rolled back, arms also up and ready to fight. Forget the sword, what, in blazes? Dragons above all species are known to be quite aggressive in procreation. This is considered foreplay, is it not? Issei didn't have time to answer, but for those interested it would have been a tentative was already dodging the next blow and countering with a sweep of his leg to knock Zenobia off hers. To his surprise and horror, she sprang back up, using the strength of her arms and core to propel her foot into his jaw. Okay, what the actual fuck? How is she keeping up with me? She's a female. In times of great desperation or want, females can gain tremendous strength at least, so I've heard. I have obviously never been a victim of a female. Issei mentally cycled through his available abilities that wouldn't harm the knight or destroy the storage facility, thereby getting himself into even more trouble. For his hesitation, Zenobia managed to land a solid heel-driven kick to his sternum, knocking him back a few steps. Enough to put me on the defensive, and she couldn't use that in the Kakabial fight. That was then. She wants a child now. For a female in heat, that would certainly be enough. I mean, that would be logical. Zenobia, cut it out. Issei rolled aside as the Amazon leapt across the room easily in chase. If you want a dragon's kid so badly, there's one tied up outside that would be thrilled to oblige. I'm aware that Genshiro Saji finds me attractive. However, I wish to have the strongest child imaginable. A demidrake with the power of a legendary dragon inside him, there is no comparison. Better yet, you have a holy attribute. Even though I am no longer with the church, I still find that power quite enticing. Fucking ridiculous. Issei tilted his head, allowing for Zenovia's next strike to whiz harmlessly by his ear. He began to regret not dodging entirely as she then leapt up and over him upside down, catching his neck and shoulder in a grab, one that he was well aware its effectiveness and end result. With her new speed and his being caught off guard, he wouldn't have time to counter it without hurting her. Again, and oh no. Well, fuck me. I'm trying. Stop resisting. Zenobia cried out, frustrated and completely misinterpreting his words as she landed, using her body weight and night speed to gain the momentum she needed. Up and over her shoulder he went, then back down in a hefty crash. He was stunned from the impact, surprised that Zenobia could do it, shocked over what she wanted, and being flummoxed at her audacity to go through with her intent. She didn't waste time, flipping in a back handspring over his torso to straddle his waist. Some traitorous part of him actually liked that flip. Top form for a gymnastics routine in any official tournament. Also, she looked damn good while doing it. Alarmed at his traitorous thoughts, Issei practically yanked at the mental bonds he had, hoping that Akeno and Rias would notice during their poolside brawl. Having sent his hasty SOS, he tried to get up, only for Zenobia to headbutt him. Oh, she moaned in pain, clutching her forehead. She hadn't landed any hits that would really hurt him or damage herself, but she had neglected to remember that Issei was particularly thick-skulled. The brunette shook her head, though from his position Issei could see past her bangs that hid the light bruise. He tried to twist his torso and hips, but Zenobia wasn't having it, grabbing his wrists and forcing them down beside him. Issei couldn't help but growl. He was annoyed before, now he was getting angry. He began to force her back up, managing to get into a sitting position with her in his lap. Please, get off. Zenobia countered his efforts by throwing her arms around his chest, fingers tightly interlocked above his upper back. Issei tried to pry her off, but the stubborn girl kept a hold of him. Her chest pressed against his, she looked into his eyes with a firm glare. I'm not asking for romance or love. Just sex until conception is confirmed. Just what is going on? A voice asked ever so sweetly. Both teenagers looked to the door, where both Rias and Akeno stood, fully dressed this time. Sona stood behind them, light glaring maliciously off her glasses. For an absurd moment, Issei thought that Sona was mad at him for being unfaithful to his mates. He then remembered that Zenobia had stripped and mounted him while still on school property. Miss Student Council President probably had something to say about that. Fortunately, his mate's ire seemed focused on Zenobia. Sensing a chance in the distraction, he activated his light wings. Flat on his back as he was, they gouged into the floor, but it was enough for him to teleport the hell out and leave Zenobia to the Inquisition. The third years let him go, they couldn't follow easily, and they could find him later. Zenobia, I must have misheard. Rias ground out, I could have sworn you were asking Issei for sex. It's true, the knight shamelessly confessed. I want a strong child, and Issei would be the best sire my age. I will not accept another. Rias had been prepared for denial that she could take and retaliate. Her response to blunt honesty was less than stellar. She gaped. Akeno wasn't any better, and the three younger girls of the orc gathering behind them also let their despair and feelings on the matter be heard. Zenobia sweat-dropped as she felt very much in danger. Someone's been naughty, trying to take what isn't hers without permission. Yes, with Ria's shell-shocked, Akeno stepped forward as her right hand to administer discipline. Zenobia felt very much in danger at that moment. A magic circle flared to life in the living room, unceremoniously ejecting one exhausted demidrake to sprawl onto a well-placed couch. The teen in question was covered in soot, turning his usual silver hair a dark gray, and with his face partially covered it made him look decades older. Issei. Asia all-it ran to his side with a bowl of water and a washcloth. Are you alright? I'm fine, Asia. Thank you. The kindest bishop began dabbing as the boy's face, removing the dark spots and dust. After a moment, Asia noticed that while he was talking, his chest wasn't moving with the regular intake of air. Before she could ask, Issei smiled weakly. Some drunk idiot managed to start a fire in the warehouse district, and I got called in as emergency firefighter, which I guess was important enough it bypassed the job suspensions. I'm fine, but I breathed in a lot of smoke. I don't want to mess up the house. Even if he was doing a tremendous job of holding his breath, Asia could still smell a distinct burnt scent with every word. Well, it wasn't as if she'd leave over some stale air. You know, you don't need to do this, the boy protested as Asia wetted the cloth and then wiped away at his neck and arms. He tried to take the cloth from her, but she wouldn't have it. Seriously, you don't. But I want to help you, Issei. Asia's face in his field of vision seemed beeped sideways to lend her an even more innocent persona to her kind heart. You work very hard, and I'll always be there to help you. Issei winced internally at the declaration. Always was a word that he was becoming steadily uncomfortable with when heard from Asia, Ravel, and Kaneko. It wasn't so much of the word, but how they'd use it. Added into conversation here and there, some subtle and some not so subtle hints that they were still seeking him in a romantic light. His silence seemed to be visibly apparent as Asia stopped in her ministrations. Issei. Are you alright? Two fine trails of smoke wafted from Issei's nostrils as he lost control for a moment. Just tired. A half-truth. I'll be fine. Though Asia looked somewhat dejected before shaking her head and mustering her nerve. When are we going to hang out? Huh? You said we could spend time together, just the two of us. This caused Issei to withdraw a moment as he tried to remember what she was talking about. Then he recalled it. The failed tennis match. the dodgeball resolution. And the night between the two, prepping the orc headbands. The casual promise that they'd spend some time together. More light smoke from his filled lungs as Issei coughed in embarrassment and sat up straight. I'd completely forgotten. Glancing at the clock and satisfied that it wasn't too late, would you like to go out now? Sudden, but if possible Asia seemed even more contagiously positive. Sure. And the girl ran off, presumably to change out of the shorts and camisole she was wearing. Issei swung his legs back to ground and placed his head in his hands. Where to go? Where to go and make it only a platonic outing? Mall, movies, dinner, arg, these decisions wouldn't do. That was when he found something that normal people couldn't do. And it just might be good enough. When Asia returned in slim jeans and sweater, all he asked was, "Are you afraid of heights?" "There's nothing to be scared of," Issei reiterated to a visibly nervous Asia. They were standing on the roof of the manor, and with nightfall the lights of the city were on in full glow. "I know that." Still Asia trembled, from fear or cold he wasn't sure. "Don't worry," Issei finished tightening the climbing harness he procured for her, clipping the safety line from it to his own belt. He'd never drop her, but the placebo was enough to comfort Asia, so that her nervousness seemed to abate for now. "Just out of curiosity, how much flying have you done since your reincarnation?" "None at all." Issei had to quickly expand his wings and dig the flexible tips into the roof to prevent himself from falling off in surprise and dragging the helpless Asia with him. Screw the 10 Commandments, the Gospel, every devil request constraint, common courtesy, the laws of aerodynamics, and all forms of logic. This was a sin of the highest magnitude if he had ever heard of one. How? He shook his head. First swimming and now this. In the name of everything holy or demonic and all in between, how have you not really flown yet? Asia flushed a bit, tapping her pointer fingers together in embarrassment. "Well, the rating game? No, you would have taken the stairs to the roof, or Rias would have carried you." Issei was still lost on tangent, rubbing his chin as one would an imaginary beard. "And on our stray hunts you've stuck close to Rias and Akeno while we took offensive still, never on your own." The bishop meekly shuffled in place while looking at the floor in embarrassment. She looked up when an arm wrapped around her shoulders and another was placed on her waist. This is less of a flight and more a flying lesson now." Issei's wings were now spread fully for the first downbeat. "You ready?" Asia swallowed nervously and nodded, not trusting her own voice. Issei's voice was reassuring with his next words, "Don't worry, I won't go full throttle, just enough to get to a good height for you to start practicing." With that, the wings bore down, launching the two skyward. Asia's breath was torn away in both the physical rush as well as the awe. Every second Issei climbed skyward was another that the earth seemed to fall away. Without warning, Issei flared his aura, surprising Asia. For whatever reason, it didn't fill her with a sense of dread or impending demise, but she felt safe and secure. Lost in the feeling, she didn't notice the moisture condensing on the formed energy shield surrounding her until they reached the clouds. Breaking through the layer, the two floated above the sea of white. "This'll do," Issei nodded even if she couldn't see it. "You do know how to summon your wings, right?" "Yes. I know how to do that." Asia cheered until she realized what would happen next. "Alright then," Issei's arm dropped from her waist, though she was kept steady at his side via a combination of the speed he maintained, as well as his grip on her. "Get ready and don't worry, I won't let you fall." Asia felt a twinge as her own wings appeared, the magic energy forming them stabilizing as she too unconsciously adjusted to their velocity. "Now, from what I understand you don't need to move them around like I do, yours are magical. Instead, focus on where you want to go and do it." Issei let go of her shoulder, only to barrel roll under her when she yelled and nearly fell. Landing on his chest, she clung to him by wrapping her arms around his neck and legs around his midsection. "Don't let go. Asia, you can do this," he murmured softly. "You're one of the bravest people I know." To reassure her shocked expression, "You healed an injured devil despite knowing what he was and how you'd be treated for it. You clung to your faith despite how others treated you. And you had the courage to become a devil of your own free will despite your convictions. If that's not bravery, I don't know what is. But I'm not brave like you. I think the word you're looking for is reckless. Idiotic. Dense. Willfully determined. Stubborn to a fault. Bravery for me might be politely stretching things a little far." Issei hugged her close, still flying as a makeshift floor. "Now, brave maiden, shall we try again?" This time when he held her shoulder, she spread her arms like wings and remained aloft. There was a look of emboldened determination on her face, one that endeared her to him. This time when he let go, she remained airborne and maintaining the same velocity as before. She wobbled now and then and yelped as she encountered a stray air pocket and its turbulence, but otherwise she was flying just fine. Perhaps the clincher was when she flew through a cloud. The sudden moisture and cold startled her and she dropped a significant distance yet steadied herself. Then she became aware of something. Issei was flying just about ahead of her, still on his back to look up at her. The detached lead and harness in his hands. Asia nearly fell out of the sky, but she managed to save herself despite the shock. To her surprise, she held steady after wobbling a bit and tried to increase her speed to catch up to Issei. Much like a toddler will try walking from one parent to another when first discovering steps or a child learning to ride a bike without training wheels, Asia slowly closed the distance between them. Issei himself was cautious not to do any more than glide to maintain his initial position. Any downbeat of his wings would cause another air pocket to smack into Asia and destroy whatever newfound confidence she had. Slowly but surely, Asia caught up to him, her wings retracting when she collided with him, but strong hands held her in place. She buried her face in his chest, unwilling to look down lest she lose her nerve, but Issei rotated so that they were vertically standing once more. That wasn't so bad, was it? Issei chuckled with amusement. It was nice. Asia agreed, but she still didn't let go. You really like flying, don't you? If you do, why would you ever land? Issei's grin grew wider. I must eat and sleep sometime. But flying really is the best sport. One mistake and the penalty could be death. Best make that second best rush ever. Asia didn't quite understand what he meant by that, but nodded in understanding. Issei then extended his arm again to move away and she got ready for another try. A few hours later, Issei landed on a balcony attached to the manor. Poor Asia had exhausted herself, but she was glowing with pride. Having gone from no flight capability to using her magic to shield herself from inclement weather and unassisted flight, her learning curve was pretty good in Issei's opinion. He wanted to credit his teaching skills in his favorite pastime, but despite her initial timidity, Asia was eagerly progressing. Was she an aerial acrobat? Not yet. She was still clumsy, in the sky and on the ground. However, he had a feeling that would change in time. She wasn't a child, and she had her own wings. It's not like he could prevent her from practicing. Did I do well today? Asia yawned as Issei carried her to her room. You were amazing, Asia, Issei hugged her tightly, an easy thing to do when he was carrying her bridal style. A few tweaks here and there in your technique and the others might mistake you for a natural. Asia yawned and nuzzled into him sleepily, causing Issei to feel uncomfortable at his still lacking sense of revulsion towards another female. For the time being, he ignored it. He'd had fun that night, he wouldn't let himself feel guilty for having a good time with someone he considered a friend and nothing more. As he gently lay her in bed and pulled the blankets to her chin, he felt the revulsion towards himself disappear momentarily. Peacefully asleep, Issei was struck by the sudden desire to kiss her. Not on the crown of her head or her cheek, but as if he was Prince Philip and she the sleeping beauty. Shock, terror, and a slight bit of shame ran through him as he fled the room quietly, making sure to keep these emotions in check and hidden from his mates. Wandering into a previously unexplored section of the manor, he found himself in a locker room, but more importantly, alone. What the hell is wrong with me? He cursed at his reflection in the closest mirror. Asia isn't mine, she won't ever be, because I already belong to my mates, girlfriends, wives. The marble counter began to fracture from where he gripped it. What is going on? Still agonizing over the strange feeling in his chest, Issei pushed open one of the two doors of the master bedroom and stopped after closing it, his woes forgotten. At the full-size mirror, Rias stood admiring herself. She had just come from the shower, and though the towel at her feet was damp with moisture, there were still rivulets on her bare body. Admiring the view? She called without turning to face him. Absolutely, but what brought this on? Something Zenobia said during her interrogation about being a mother. Any jokes or witty comebacks Issei might have had vanished, she was being serious. You know we're still in high school. I know we haven't talked about it, but I kinda figured teenage parenthood was something to avoid. I know, she hefted her impressive bust with one arm while the other was placed on her flat stomach. Still, I thought I'd say goodbye to my body. Just in case. Huh? My belly would grow with life. One we made together. Her other hand joined its counterpart over her tummy. I'm not sure I'd be pleasant during pregnancy. My clothes won't fit, I won't be able to see my feet. Issei stripped off his two-shirt combo and hugged her from behind, providing his own warmth to hers. You'd be beautiful. Aren't I always? She asked teasingly. Ah, but motherhood would suit you. Issei brought one hand to rest over hers. My breasts would no longer be exclusively for you. There was a minute's silence. I'd adjust. Ria's hands left to cover her mouth, but even then that didn't suppress the laughter that followed. Liar. A wave of irritation swept over Issei until someone, with two very soft somethings, hugged him from behind. Issei will always think we're beautiful. Akeno chirped with joy. But if we're making children, I'll have as many as Issei's willing to put in me. Akeno. You can't take our time. Moo, you had him in the baths and it's my familiar that cleans this whole place. Ignoring the pool fight today, it's my turn. Before the argument devolved into a magically enhanced pillow fight again, Issei simply grabbed both and leapt for the bed. A few hours later, Issei rolled off of akeno and lay down, pulling the quivering girl close, even as Rias shifted to his other side. Truly, sex was awesome in ways words could never truly describe. But it wasn't the answer to everything. Rias was still quieter than normal. She tried to hide it, tried to dim the connection they shared, but Issei could tell she was still disturbed to some degree. He tapped akeno and nodded at Rias. The Nadeshiko beauty nodded tiredly, and they both turned on their side so that Issei could spoon their king, while akeno hugged her mate's broad shoulders. "You can't hide it, princess," he murmured softly. "Is the subject of children still bothering you?" Rias squirmed in place, but Issei wouldn't let go. Eventually she gave up, letting her head rest against his chest while he buried his face in her hair. "My parents have been together for more than 3,000 years. She sighed, wiggling her behind into Issei's lap. "And in that time, the only children they've had are Surzich's and me, roughly 2 millennia apart. And then there's Milika's, who's only born after centuries of Surzich's and Grafia trying for a child." Rias Issei tried to console her. "It could be centuries until we conceive, and that's because of me. I'm not like akeno, naturally fertile." The Halfolen looked away in discomfort, "but even then, I don't have the aura to help conceive." The unspoken issue. True, akeno's fertility was slightly impacted by her reincarnation, but she still had a better chance for children than Rias. But even then, both girls were weak by comparison to the being who mated with them. To conceive a dragon, the parents needed to contribute a significant amount of energy, usually aura when both parents were dragons, though immense power of other esoteric types would do. Besides the necessary physical activity inherent to procreation, the power needed to support conception and creation of the aura of a new dragon was immense, possibly the greatest limitation to the overall population of hybrid dragons. Issei could give his share and more, but what Rias hated was how her own levels were nowhere near adequate. Given that akeno had let go to curl into a ball on his other side, Issei surmised that she too was realizing the obvious limitation. Devil fertility rates were the least of their concern, without the comparative energy they might as well be barren. For the girls to both bear children as they were, that was more energy than Issei on his own could safely give, and though they both knew he'd offer it freely, to be the weak links in this relationship was wearing down upon them, now that their limits were being confronted. Seeing that both girls were curled up in their depression, Issei tilted so that he was flat on his back, then pulled both girls atop him, so they had no choice but to look him in the eyes. "You two are going to make me go grey before I'm 20, the silver-haired teen sighed at how close he already was. "I suppose this is my fault for not bringing kids up sooner, but let's be real. Do either of you have plans to have children before college graduation?" Both girls nodded in the negative. "Then what's the point in worrying now? I still haven't hit my maturity." The demidrake rolled his eyes in frustration, "but after that I should have the energy needed for children to become a reality. I might put myself in a coma for half a year, but it'd be worth it." Both girls broke down in tears then, sobbing into his chest. Not even the post-coitus glow could help them, overcome with emotion as they were. Akeno made her thoughts on the matter clear. Between her pointer and thumb, electricity sparked. An orb of blackish flame danced in Ria's palm, and together the girls hit their mate in the face. "Arg, why?" Issei frowned as he nursed the burns on his chin and cheek. In addition to the lava bites on his neck and shoulders, he had 2 more marks from them that night. "You idiot. As if we'd let you carry the burden by yourself," Rias shouted. Akeno nodded vehemently. "I'm going to start training more. With my dad if I have to. You won't be draining yourself just so we can have children." "And I'll learn more from my mother," Rias affirmed. "Don't get any ideas, I forbid you from doing anything that would take you from us for that much time." The girls both settled down now, resting their heads upon his shoulders as usual. While normally he would wrap his arms around them, they pulled his arms down between them, between the valley of their chests, so that their joined hands rested above their wombs. "You two," Issei smiled as he heard and felt their breathing slow as sleep overtook them. "You two are something else." Arms trapped as they were, he could not reach the blankets to cover them, so he sat up just enough for his wings to unfurl and cover them all. A warm blanket of sorts, where the lovers slept together. Blissfully forgetting the troubles and challenges beyond those 4 walls. In Akeno's pleasure chamber, Zenobia lay with her arms and legs tied to a wooden table. Akeno had forced her back into her swimsuit before taking her back to the manor, the suit perfect for the queen's intent. That had been hours ago, not long after being caught at the pool. The sadist had deigned to use several toys in her collection. A vibrator was placed lengthwise against the junction between her legs, held in place by the thong. 2 vibrating beads pressed against her nipples and held there by the scant cloth of her top. The blue net night shook as her body betrayed her again. She'd lost count of how many times she'd peaked. This was treatment she'd never felt before in service to the church. Akeno's retaliation was clever. Lesser girls would have gone mad. But not her, Zenobia swore, even as she felt another one coming. She'd lost this battle, but she'd win the war. She'd be carrying Issei's child eventually, mates be damned. A few hours of torturous rapture wouldn't deter her. It wasn't until noon the next day that Akeno remembered where she was and whether to release her. End of the part 17. So how was this story? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this story with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.